Hello, everyone. It is Matthew Kapitas as usual, and welcome back to Cubic Dimensions. So this week has been kind of hectic, uh, and there's been a lot of demonstrations since the inauguration of President Trump, and there have been some pretty good sized crowds. You might call them huge. So I just came from one. It was at Copley Square in Boston. I was working. I currently work for Grassroots Campaigns, a national organization that helps fundraise for various nonprofits and progressive organizations. Right now, we're working with the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC, and previously we've worked for Planned Parenthood and the ACLU and groups such as that. But anyway, that's besides the point. I was there. Obviously, there have been demonstrations in various airports to protest President Trump's recent executive order, which essentially bans anybody from coming in the country who are from 7 Muslim majority countries. Now, I might get these wrong, but I'm pretty sure they're Iran, Iraq, Syria, Sudan. There are a few others that I cannot think of off the top of my head. But that garnered a significant amount of opposition, and obviously people are pretty upset about it. And I'm very surprised at how spontaneous they were. I believe he signed these orders either yesterday or the day before, and already people had put together demonstrations, and they weren't as big and as well organized, at least from what I saw in Copley Square, as the Women's March was, but definitely a lot of energy, a lot of fervor there. There was also one at Logan Airport, which Mayor Walsh and Senator Warren attended. And yeah, it's very impressive. You know, if there's a silver lining for the Trump years, for those of us who don't like him necessarily, which according to a new CNN poll, that's 44% of the country, at least that was polled, then it's good. It's good. There's the silver lining that people are starting to get civically involved. They're starting to care a lot more. You know, especially towards the latter years of the Obama administration, we truly lived in a slacktivist culture. And I'm not innocent in this. I'm not an angel in this. But we really did. It was just people, you know, sharing stuff on Facebook, and that was about it. But now people are actually getting out there. They're marching, they're protesting, they're making their voices heard. Now, of course, that's not the only thing you do. So what I do for my job is I street canvass. I basically bug people for money, for donations, for whatever organization. Again, currently it's the Southern Poverty Law Center that we're raising money for. But basically what I'm doing is I'm bugging people for money. And a lot of people ignore me just because, you know, they probably ignore most street canvassers, probably a lot of homeless people too. They don't want to be bothered. They're on their way. It makes sense. And some people are actually in a rush. They can't talk. But a lot of people, I do run into a few people every day so our grab is, and I'd also like to note I'm not an official spokesperson for Grassroots Campaigns or the Southern Poverty Law Center or any group that we canvass for. So just like to put that out there. Anyway, so anything I say doesn't necessarily represent those groups. Anyway, so I'll have a few people. So our grab is, hey, we're shutting down hate groups and fighting Donald Trump. Do you have a second? And I've had quite a number of people say, oh, I already did that, especially today with the demonstration in Copley Square and last Saturday with the Women's March. And okay, here's the thing. Demonstrating is great, right? It shows that you care, that you take the time to go out and have your voice heard. That's perfectly fine. That's great. That's how strikes work. Like, totally in favor of that. But that's not the only thing you should be doing. Granted, people don't know necessarily what I'm asking of them when I do my grab, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt there. But if you don't have your own time to spare to, because what the Southern Poverty Law Center does, much like the ACLU, is that when there's an instance of discrimination, they will represent victims of discrimination free of charge, and they will file lawsuits against either the hate organizations or, in some cases, the government in instances of discrimination without any charge to their clients. And when the lawsuit ends, whether they win or they lose, they don't take the settlement or from the ruling, whatever it is. So that's why they rely mainly on donations from people completely nonprofit, don't accept any government funding neither. So donating to groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, like ACLU, like Planned Parenthood, if you don't have your own time to represent victims of discrimination in court or be knocking down the doors of every senator and congressman in the United States, then the next best thing you can do is you can donate to causes that do that, that have people who are full-time working on those issues. Or I should say, you could call senators and congressmen, not just necessarily your representatives, but all of them, to let them know your feelings on various issues, such as, of course, right now, President Trump's picks for his cabinet are being considered currently. And if you don't like a certain nominee, such as Betsy DeVos for Secretary of Education, then you can call the various senators who are on the committee which approve or review, I should say, the nominee for Secretary of Education, and tell them you don't want them to vote for them. That can really make a difference. Now, will it necessarily work? No, it really depends. But it is work. It is actually doing something, rather than just sharing stuff on Facebook and going to marches. That's, again, spreading information and showing solidarity and stuff like that. Not dissing that at all. Great idea. But because I do that too, but you also have to make it tangible too. So yeah. Another thing I'd like to note is, so earlier I noted that 44% of the United States, according to a recent CNN poll, disapprove of President Trump's job. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this in previous Cubic Dimensions, in the last two of this season. I might have, but I don't know. I'm not sure. So I'm going to reiterate this because this is a very important point. We've had multiple presidents in the past lose the popular vote, or just only have a plurality of winning the popular vote, meaning most people voted against them. But they just managed to get more than everybody else. Recent examples being Bill Clinton in both his election and re-election. He only got around 40-something% of the vote. And of course, George W. Bush in 2000, he lost the popular vote but won the electoral, much like President Trump now, although to not as large of a margin. And yet they came into office during their transition and after they were inaugurated. They call it the 100 days after they were inaugurated, the honeymoon period for presidents, where they had approval ratings of between 60 and 70%, which usually fades away once real work starts being done, because people want to have an optimistic idea of what the president's going to do, and they want to they want to be proud of their president. They want to be excited for how they're going to change things, right? Even if they didn't, even if they lost the popular vote, even if not everybody voted for them, which is great. But the thing is with President Trump is before his election, his disapprovals were higher than his approvals. Same thing with Hillary Clinton, although to a lesser extent. During the transition, his disapprovals were higher than his approvals for the most part. And of course, currently right now, 44% of those polled view him in a negative light. I think it's 34 or 36 view him in a positive light, and then the rest aren't sure. So, you know, presidents can have 44% disapproval and still have positive approval ratings. I believe President Obama was around that number at times. But no, he has a net negative approval rating at the moment. And he's just barely gotten started. Yeah, he's done a few executive orders, and it's been relatively quick, but even before that, even before he started doling these out, he still had negative approval ratings. That is bad for him. That looks horrible. And I think the main reason why he's issuing all these executive orders in such a rapid fashion, and why they're so far-reaching in their scope and in their topic, is because he wants to be a winner. He views himself, he's an egomaniac, he wants to win. He wants to be seen as a man of action. And the founder of Path for Progress and member Chris, not Christian, but Chris, he kind of pointed this out, and I've been saying this for a while, but kind of forgot about it until now. So I want to thank him and give him credit for reminding me, because I believe he made a similar point in a discussion with me earlier this week. So I'm pretty sure I mentioned this shortly before the election on Cubic Dimensions. But anyway, there's this great documentary. Who did it? I'm blanking on right now. I want to say it's like PBS or something like that, or CNN. It was essentially profiles of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. 2 hours long. Half the time, obviously, they talked about Hillary Clinton's life. The other half, they talked about Donald Trump's life, and they went, all the way up to their lives until the election. And an interesting point was that Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, at the dinner table with his children, would teach his children, and this was supposedly Donald Trump's favorite lesson, because he'd teach various lessons, was that there are winners and losers in life. And the winners are called killers. And so Fred Trump Jr., Donald Trump's brother, and obviously namesake being his father, he did not want to fall into the family business of real estate and generally corporate stuff. He wanted to be an artist, I believe. And because of multiple things, but also because his family didn't really accept that, he ended up drinking himself to death. Very tragic. Back in the 70s or 80s, I believe. And Donald Trump at the time was quoted with saying, when his brother died, "My brother wasn't a killer." Now, if that isn't indicative of what kind of crazy, screwed up guy Donald Trump is, and what kind of egomaniac he is, I don't know what does. That pretty much sealed the deal for me when I saw that about my opinion and perception of Donald Trump. I already didn't like him, but this really solidified it. This man is not well. He is all about himself. We've had plenty of presidents. There are plenty of politicians who are just in it for themselves, who are just in it to get into the history books. That's, of course, completely that's completely something that happens. It's not an uncommon phenomenon. The problem is that they're generally good about hiding it, or they're very covert and sneaky about it. Donald Trump isn't. He is quite obvious about it. And it's to the point that it makes me physically ill. How disgustingly self-serving, self-indulgent, self-aggrandizing this man is. Disappointing that because of the way our electoral system works, he won. And it's even more disappointing that a major party in the United States nominated him with a majority of their voters voting for him. Very disappointing to me. And while we're on that thought, I may not have said this necessarily in writing, so it's kind of hard to prove. But I've always been a student of the US government, US politics. I've studied it very thoroughly, starting when I was 10 or 12. And almost immediately, I picked up on how screwed up the Electoral College idea is. The idea of the Electoral College is inherently undemocratic. And I'm disappointed that people haven't really realized that and haven't really made a hubbub about that until recently. Like even with the election in 2000, yeah, there was some talk about that, but it was mainly arguments over the recount. Now, if the Electoral College didn't exist, that recount wouldn't have mattered because Al Gore still would have won the popular vote and become president. Now, obviously, I'm a bit biased because in almost every instance where the Electoral College determined the president and not the popular vote, the popular vote was won by the person who lost. Almost always the Democrat. It was almost always the Democrat. So, and I'm myself am a registered Democrat, so I'm going to admit I'm a bit biased here. But really, really, I think any honest, understanding, decent Republican, or someone affiliated with a third party or no party, could understand that as well. Could understand that the Electoral College system is antiquated. It's not something that is something that we need. Don't get me wrong. I thoroughly appreciate the Founding Fathers. I think for the most part, they had a good idea. And Founding Mothers, let's not forget people like Abigail Adams, who were very influential. I'm very appreciative of their ideas, of their hard work. They truly put together a unique idea, at least at the time. Although what we do have to recognize at the same time is that it wasn't perfect. And that's why we have the ability to amend the Constitution, to pass different laws, to make this a more perfect union, as they wrote. To change things when it is necessary. And the Electoral College was made to actually benefit smaller states rather than bigger states, believe it or not. There's a great Adam Ruins Everything video on it that, again, was actually made before the election. So I'll give credit where credit is due. That points out, I think it's like the way the electoral math works, it would take like 3 times as many Californians to counterbalance the votes of Wyomingans in terms of the Electoral College. That other than 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, every state has a winner-take-all system when it comes to the Electoral College, which, again, is screwed up. California has, I think, either 55 or 57 electoral votes, and yet millions of Californians every year vote Republican. And yet in presidential elections, they might as well not vote at all. And maybe close to millions of people in Massachusetts vote Republican every year, and yet their votes don't matter. And then millions of people across the country vote third party every year, and yet their votes don't matter. That is ridiculous. That is not something, I don't get it. I don't get why we think this is a good idea, why we think we can just keep going with this. It's wrong. It's not a good idea. And people say, oh, well, the founding fathers, they set it up, so it must be good. There's also made sure the only people who could vote were white men who owned property. It took African Americans a little under a century to get the right to vote, and even then, with Jim Crow laws, they weren't able to fully express that right until another 100 years. And even then, over the past 50 or 60, their right to vote has been suppressed in multiple ways. This time, not necessarily because they're black, but because they more often than not vote Democratic. And I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to Republicans on that, who passed voter ID laws. Women, regardless of race, didn't get the right to vote until 1920. That is over 100 years after the founding of the United States, after the passage of the Constitution. And they are still not protected in the Constitution, fully, equally enshrined in the Constitution under law. We have amendments for the sole purpose of changing things that need to be changed. Why shouldn't we? Just because it's tradition, just because it's what we've had for the past however many years, doesn't make it right. It just makes it constant. And in fact, systems of oppression are, their staple is being solidified in culture and in government without any challenges to them. Now, sometimes these are unintended consequences. I don't believe that a large number of Americans, or a majority of Americans, are actively, consciously racist or sexist or any other ist. I think most Americans are genuinely and generally good, hardworking people who want what's best for the country. And yet, a lot of people can't understand that just because something's on the books doesn't mean it's right, doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean we shouldn't change it. And that's very disappointing. But anyway, let's get to some other stories of this week. So, let's see. Definitely have seen a lot of amusing signs at these demonstrations. Someone had a "Build This Wall" sign, and it was a wall in between a church and a Capitol building. I was very much amused by that. It's a good one. Even better one was someone who had a sign that read, "Is this really what we're spending our weekends on now?" Which I thought was both amusing and kind of telling about how much we have to do just to show that we don't believe in what's going on. So I don't know if we talked about this last week, but so Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, had his first press conference in which he claimed President Trump's inauguration was the most well-attended of any inauguration in history. Of course, that was blatantly false. There was a sizable crowd, but not as much as the Women's March and not nearly as much as previous inaugurations, including both of President Obama's. And so Kellyanne Conway, Trump's former campaign manager and now senior counsel to the president, went on Meet the Press and claimed that Sean Spicer used, quote, alternative facts to describe what was going on. And I'd like just to say to Kellyanne Conway, you have to be possibly, you and Sean Spicer have to be possibly the most insulting people in politics. You know, at least most politicians come up with interpretations of what they've done to try to avoid it, avoid the appearance of something bad. At least they come up with some semi-plausible reasons, right? Like it kind of makes sense. You can kind of see where they're coming from. This is bull. This insults my intelligence. And I think the vast majority of the country, including Trump voters, aren't that stupid. You can say fake news. You can rant about mainstream media being fake news, which is stupid. You could probably get away with that with your supporters. But alternative facts, that doesn't make any goddamn sense. And I believe anybody can see through that pile of crap. Interesting tweet from God. Obviously, not actually God, but the parody Twitter account that has, I believe it's the South Park God face on his cartoon, in which he said, people who still wave the Confederate flag are not allowed to say, you lost, get over it. Perfect response. So part of President Trump's slew of executive orders was restarting the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. Now, he actually didn't have to do this with the approval of Congress, so it actually kind of makes sense that he did this in executive order. President Obama did it similarly when he stopped them because it is a executive government problem. It comes down to permitting. It actually has a lot to do with the planning board, of which I am on in my hometown. It has a lot to do with municipal and state planning, interestingly enough. So, yeah, basically they have the permits that they can go ahead. They just need the approval of the president because it crossed several state lines. Of course, President Obama blocked both of them after quite a lot of pressure from demonstrators. And President Trump just said, okay, go ahead. To which I am both very disappointed and disgusted, because so many people spend so much time to protest these things. And especially, you know, Keystone XL is one thing. Dakota Access was going to go through Native American lands, was going to go through Native American grave sites, was going to say essentially F you to Native Americans, which we've done way too much in this country already. And he doesn't care. He doesn't give a damn. And I really hope in coming elections, Native Americans and their allies in North and South Dakota stick it to their representatives who went along with this, because it is incredibly, incredibly disgusting. You know, Dakota Access was actually supposed to go through Bismarck, which is predominantly white. And that was basically the reason, not to mention it's also a city, so makes sense. But they moved it because they knew there was an environmental cost to it, that there was an environmental hazard to this. And they decided that that hazard was fine to put on Native Americans. What I found in my time studying politics, and especially being on the planning board, is that corporations really think they can get away with whatever they want. If you don't check them, they think they can do whatever the hell they want. And sometimes the government, same thing. And it's really, really disgusting, and it's really insulting to people's intelligence. Of course they moved it from Bismarck because it's a pipeline. They so often result in catastrophic environmental disasters. BP, Deepwater Horizon, was just 7 years ago, like 6.5 years ago. Exxon Valdez, about 10-something years ago. It's not like these things are far in the past. They're fairly recent. And there are quite a number of smaller oil spills that have happened in the past that haven't gotten as much press. And on top of this, President Trump has also ordered a federal government contract freeze, specifically with the EPA, and a media blackout for various different government agencies, organizations, such as National Parks, National Park Service, anything to do with climate change. The White House website now has been removed of any references to the LGBT community, minorities, the disabled. It is, I don't know what else to say other than that it's disgusting. Donald Trump thinks that he's a man of action, that he's doing what's right and that he's getting this done because he's a man of action. Nothing that he has done before or after his election or after his inauguration has been positive for this country. Almost nothing. Not even the carrier deal. The carrier deal wasn't even good. He has officially no idea what he's doing, except trying to be the cool kid on the block. And it's disgusting. Good thing is that, so on my sort of tangent earlier of keeping elected officials accountable in North and South Dakota, this includes Heidi Heitkamp, especially, Democratic U.S. Senator from, I believe, North Dakota. Cenk Uygur and TYT have set up an organization known as Justice Democrats, which not only is getting progressives to run for office, much like Bernie Sanders' Our Revolution is, and I believe they're going to try to collaborate, but they're also targeting, Justice Democrats is especially targeting Democratic incumbents who they see as corporatist. So these are Democrats who tend to just tend to vote with Republicans, tend to vote with corporate interests, don't really share progressive values, not because they're personally conservative because it pleases their donors. And I encourage anybody and everybody who's interested in running for office, who's interested in working on campaigns, to check out Justice Democrats, as well as Our Revolution. Because if there's anything that we really need done, it's to get more Democrats elected who represent us, and more politicians in general. You know, I'm not a big fan of Republicans. I happen to not actually mind that much. Recently elected U.S. Senator from Nebraska, Ben Sass. I think he's very genuine. He's very down to earth. He opposes Trump, which is great. And you know, that's another thing that I forgot to mention. I shared on my personal Facebook a statement by Justin Amash, who is a U.S. congressman and a Republican. And I just want to look him up real quickly because I don't want to get this wrong. He is from the Michigan 3rd. And I believe he was elected in the Tea Party wave. Yeah, he's the chair of the House Liberty Caucus, which is associated with Tea Party movement. And he actually, believe it or not, for a while was one of the leading Republican politicians, to oppose Donald Trump throughout the entire campaign, which is interesting that there were a lot of them who kind of went back on that and then said, oh, never mind, we're actually, for him. And then we're like, oh, yeah, sure. So he had some great words. I didn't fully agree with what he said, but I appreciate it nonetheless, because if there's anything Donald Trump has done, he's not divided the country. He did during the election, but now he's really united the country against him. President Trump has united the country against him. And like I said earlier with the civic activism thing, if there's any silver lining from this whole mess, it's that Donald Trump has encouraged the unity of Americans, no matter what their political persuasions are. John McCain. So another executive order that Donald Trump signed was, or I think I might. I think it was an executive order reinstating waterboarding. To which Senator John McCain, who experienced torture while in Vietnam for 2 years, POW for 2 years, he stated, the president can sign whatever executive orders he likes, but the law is the law. We are not bringing back torture in the United States of America. And he's made various statements similar to that since then. And, John McCain, especially with the Tea Party wave, he got a little too right-wing for my tastes, mainly to appease Tea Partiers. But since I'd say like 2014, 2015, he's mellowed out again a bit. And I really appreciate that, for the most part, he and Lindsey Graham are two, for the most part, common sense Republicans. They know when to give and when to take. And there are just some issues where they recognize that everybody's on the same side because it just makes sense, torture being one of them. And I get it, Republicans typically don't care about stuff like that unless it's happened to them. And it did happen to John McCain. But you know what? We don't know that necessarily, just because he wasn't a politician before he got tortured. And he's a generally decent person otherwise anyway. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and say he'd oppose torture even if he wasn't tortured, and that he'd be a decent person nonetheless. So I'm going to give him that credit. And I thank John McCain for his service. You know, I probably mentioned this on previous Cupid Dimensions or This Week Has 1 Hour, whichever one was going when this happened. When Donald Trump said John McCain was no war hero because he was captured, what John McCain did, his father, also named John McCain, was the commander of the U.S. Navy in the South Pacific. He was a vice admiral, I believe, at the time of the Vietnam War. And when John McCain was captured, the North Vietnamese told him, because of the status of your father, we will let you go. And his response was, no, I'm not going unless every other American POW in this camp leaves with me. And they said, okay, well then you don't go. Because they weren't going to give up all those POWs. And so for 2 years, he gave up 2 years of his life to torture, to starvation, because his captors wouldn't let everybody go. I don't care what your political affiliation is, what your opinions are. That is a war hero. That is a commendable person. John McCain made the near ultimate sacrifice out of complete selflessness. And he should be applauded for that service. And anybody who criticizes him because he was captured, because he allowed himself to be tortured, is disgusting. And I'm even more amused how Donald Trump did that and also managed to dodge the draft 4 or 5 times from Vietnam. Sorry, Don, not everybody is a coward. Not everybody is a fucking coward like you. Some people actually have guts. Some people are actually principled. A good article in Politico, 6 reasons not to resist Donald Trump. And it's a little amusing, but it makes sense. Number 1, don't encourage Nazi punchers, window smashers, or limo arsonists. Okay, so Richard Spencer, him getting punched was amusing. We discussed that last week. Honestly, I'm going to give it a pass. But really, violence does delegitimize our argument. Because, not necessarily because it makes us look bad, that's part of it, but also because the opposition to Trump has mainly been love, not hate. You know, coming together, having unity rather than division. And when people start punching people, when people start smashing windows and destroying cars, that's not coming together in love. That's breaking shit because you feel like it. And I get it, in France, they do that all the time. And, you know, what's a broken window to centuries of oppression? I get that. But guess what? Not everybody's going to think like that. When it comes to protesting, what you're trying to do, you're trying to convince other people. You're trying to convince other people of the worthiness of your cause, that what you stand for is the right thing to stand for. And when you start destroying stuff for really little to no reason, and start punching people, of course people are going to be like, oh, well, that delegitimizes your argument. Of course people are going to say that. And of course there's the argument that, oh, well, that happened during the Boston Tea Party, and that's true. You know, I think that's a different situation. And it's amusing to compare white Americans' reactions to both. Again, different situations. And also, nobody got hurt during the Boston Tea Party. Yeah, a few British guys didn't get tea to wash down with their morning crumpets, right? But no one got killed, no one got arrested, no one got thrown overboard, no one got hit with anything. Other than that, other than throwing the tea overboard, it was relatively peaceful. And that's the point. 2, relax. It's okay to have a women's march. Yeah, I don't know why the hell people are like, oh, there should be a men's march. Screw you. Like, did Donald Trump go around saying all men are nasty? No. He was going around saying women are nasty. That should just be a no-brainer. 3, celebrities are fine if you vet their speeches. Of course, this is a reference to Madonna's speech, which essentially bordered on treason, saying that she thought about blowing up the White House. Now, obviously, she probably wasn't serious about that, but really, that doesn't help the effort at all. All right, that's treason. And again, it goes to the violence thing. Don't want to be doing it. 4, intersectionality is essential. Just stop talking about it so much. Okay, so now this part actually might sound like might get you angry, but it goes on to actually make a lot of sense. Just, you know, intersectionality is important. Make sure that you recognize that people are oppressed in multiple ways, that people have problems in multiple ways, of course. But just don't be shoving terms and all these different ideas down people's throats, because not everybody was a sociology major in college or studied these sociological concepts and movements and ideas in depth. So just chill out. That's the one thing that has really turned me off from communities like those on Tumblr, is that people just throwing fucking terms around like crazy. Especially saying, oh, well, and of course the classic being, oh, well, you're a racist if you support Donald Trump, and blah, 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 blah. No. Just hear people out. Try to hear the other side of the story. Recognize that not everybody knows what intersectionality means, what all these different terms for gender identities and sexual orientations are. It's good to teach them. It's good to inform them, educate them what they mean and how they work. But let's face it, not everybody has the time or the patience to do that. So be inclusive, point out, in a reasonable manner, different issues when it comes to intersectionality. But other than that, chill. 5, don't give activists meaningless busy work. So yeah, don't just be saying, oh, you gotta return this office, blah, blah, blah. Just do some real work. 6, don't play Trump's game, stick to the issues. This is very important. Don't be just attacking him personally all the time. That's very important, because then it just makes you look about as worse as he is. Stick to issues, stick to specific issues. What I like is recently there have been a lot of marches coming up of people who have specific issues in mind, like labor protests against the immigration ban, stuff like that. Great idea. Great idea. Stick to issues. Make sure that issues are being the things addressed, or else everybody who's watching will dismiss you outright. No, but that's how people are. A great column by Chelsea Manning, who was imprisoned after releasing classified documents about back in the WikiLeaks leak of, I think, either 2010, 2011, of U.S. military actions that are essentially illegal in international standards. But she wrote this great piece. She was recently, her term was recently commuted significantly by President Obama as one of his last acts of office. And a criticism he has for President Obama, which I think is she that is a great, decent criticism, and something I've criticized President Obama on before, is he starts off by compromising. He does that thing. He does the thing where he recognizes that he's not going to get everything he wants, so he starts in the middle, which I think is incredibly misguided. The reality of the situation is that when it comes to negotiation, you're supposed to start off from a radical position, a position you know you won't get anything on, right? Then you compromise. Because what President Obama did was he started from a compromise position, especially with Obamacare. He said, okay, no public, no single-payer healthcare at all. Already rid off that off the table, and essentially rid off just a public option in general. And he made so many moves to water down Obamacare that Republicans would vote for it, that would be bipartisan. And guess what? At the end of the day, it was significantly watered down, and not a single Republican voted for Obamacare. Not a single one. You know why? Because they recognized how weak he was acting. His mentors in the Senate were Joe Lieberman and Ted Kennedy, which is really interesting considering that you can have two more different mentors in the Senate. Joe Lieberman being a party-betraying, conservative Democratic hack, Ted Kennedy being the progressive liberal lion of the Senate. But the one thing that they both had in common was that they compromised a lot with the Republicans. Joe Lieberman did so more so because he actually agreed with them with Republicans. Ted Kennedy did so because he recognized he wasn't always going to get what he wanted. Now, he was a liberal lion because he made a lot of noise. He made sure that his voice was heard, that the voices of his constituents were heard, that he was going to make a lot of noise. And then at the end of the day, he recognized that he wasn't going to get everything he did, so there was a little give and take. He allowed his Republican colleagues to have a little, and so he could get a little. And that's how he got stuff done. That's how he was an effective U.S. senator. And why, to the day he died, people across Massachusetts adored him. And President Obama, I think, took a little too much from Joe Lieberman in that respect, or just misunderstood Ted Kennedy's approach. And so it's left a very disappointing few years. Great thing, Al Franken said, no Democrats will vote to confirm Betsy DeVos for Secretary of Education, which sounds great. Let's see, Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy. So I was a little iffy. I followed him. I was studying U.S. Senate races back in 2012, and also speaking of Joe Lieberman, he succeeded Joe Lieberman in the Senate. At the time, he was a congressman running to represent Connecticut, and actually ran against and beat Linda McMahon, who I believe is now the head of the Small Business Administration, or at least the nominee for the Small Business Administration. I want to look that up real quick. But anyway, so since 2013, he has been he's been a senator from Connecticut, and rose to prominence shortly before he took office as a U.S. senator, making a big deal out of the Sandy Hook shooting, obviously because he represented Connecticut, and I believe he represented Sandy Hook in his congressional district. Okay, no, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Wait, what? Okay, no. So Linda McMahon is not yet the administrator of the Small Business Administration, but will most likely be so. Because she's, I don't like her that much, but when it comes to Republicans, she's not a bad pick. It makes sense. Anyway, so that's the context. So Senator Murphy shared a picture, of course, the infamous picture of the boy who washed up on a Greek island who was trying to escape from Syria and had died. A very small boy, looked to be a toddler. And his caption was, "To my colleagues, don't ever again lecture me on American moral leadership if you chose to be silent today." So his reference is to the ban on immigrants and refugees that President Trump signed, because he also barred refugees from coming in, as well as just general immigrants, green card holders. So I thought it was something very powerful. You should go on Senator Murphy's Facebook page and look at it. I begin to really like him a lot. He is a progressive lion. He's fairly young, so he's probably going to be in the Senate for a while, except for re-election in 2018. And yeah, just damn. It was good. It was very good, what he did. Okay, next we have yet another piece from Jason Kander in the Washington Post, and he explains why Trump keeps up this lie about the voter fraud. So recently, President Trump, Vice President Pence announced that they're actually going to launch an investigation into the supposed voter fraud in California, where they claim, I should say, 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton. Now, of course, the funny thing is that if that's the case, and this is his explanation for why he lost the popular vote. If that was the case, if the Clintons were behind this and they wanted to do that, why didn't they do that in the swing states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, and Florida, with which, if they had won them, they would have won? Makes a lot more sense. But so the interesting point that Jason Kander makes is that Trump isn't just doing this for his ego. Trump is actually doing this because Republicans have a stake in the game. For a while now, as I mentioned earlier on in this podcast, they have been pushing voter ID laws and the myth of voter fraud consistently. And they stand to gain from Trump promoting this because it makes people even more worried. Now, so let me explain the problem with voter ID laws for those of you who don't already understand. What most voter ID laws require is that when you go to the voting booth, and when you register to vote, they require people to have 2 forms of identification, kind of like when you apply for a job. Now, the problem is in a lot of poor areas or lower income areas, a lot of people don't have 2 forms of identification. Generally, the ones that are accepted are social security cards, licenses, passports, birth certificates, that kind of thing. Well, a lot of people don't have those things. Some people may have lost their birth certificate or social security card. They might not have ever gotten a license. They might not have gotten a passport. So because of that, they are not able to get a voter ID. They're not able to vote. And again, the way these are structured is that it either costs people a lot of money or a lot of time to get registered to vote. And so especially people who don't have either of those to spend very often, they just give up. And an interesting thing that Jason Kander points out is that turnout in Wisconsin, which has been a reliably Democratic state, hit a 20-year low in 2016. Quote, officials Election officials in the state pointed to a noticeable turnout decrease compared with 2012 in high poverty areas where voters may have had the greatest difficulty complying with recently implemented photo ID laws. So the thing is that they're not necessarily doing this because they're racist. It's because Black people who, again, tend to be, and minorities in general, who tend to be less well off economically, also tend to vote Democratic in droves. I can't remember the last time a Republican has won the Black or Latino vote. It just hasn't happened recently at a national level. And Republicans have started to notice this, so rather than try to appeal to those groups as their 2012 post-mortem said they should, instead they decide, nah, let's just make it harder for them to vote because, you know, that's a great idea. Let's see. A federal judge has also blocked partially the implementation of Trump's immigration ban nationwide with help from the ACLU that filed a lawsuit. So props to the ACLU. Multiple cities, including Boston here, their mayors, Marty Walsh, have promised their cities will be sanctuaries for immigrants and refugees, which I think is wonderful. But that's about all we have time for tonight, folks. Thank you very much for everybody who joined and listened. Please like us, share us on Facebook as well as on here. Fortunately, I don't have a lot of time, so I don't have a lot of time to promote this channel, but I'm going to be getting my first paycheck from Grassroots soon, and hopefully that'll give me enough money to start paying for ads for A Path for Progress and for Cubic Dimensions and get the name out there more. But anyway, thank you all again for listening. Hope some of you will stay on to hear Let's Talk Cape Cod on my personal channel. And as always, remember, have malice toward none.